All right, on to the last chapter of Little House in the Big Woods. Oh, I hate that it's the last chapter. I put a book in everybody's packet. Guys, I gave you the Sugar Creek Gang, and girls, I gave you the fairy books. I also gave you little bee puppets, little finger puppets. The Sugar Creek Gang, boys, is one of my favorites. And girls, I thought you'd really like that fairy series. But let's finish Little House in the Big Woods. And chapter 13 is A Deer in the Wood. The grass was dry and withered, and the cows must be taken out of the woods and kept in the barn to be fed. All the bright colored leaves became dull brown, and the cold fall rains began. There was no more playing under the trees, but Pa was in the house when it rained, and he began again to play the fiddle after supper. Then the rain stopped. The weather grew colder. In the early mornings, everything sparkled with frost. The days were growing short, and a little fire burned all day in the cook stove to help keep the house warm. Winter was not far away. The attic and the cellar were full of good things once more to eat, and Laura and Mary had started to make patchwork quilts. Everything was beginning to be snug and cozy again. One night when he came in from doing the chores, Pa said that after supper he would go to his deer lick and watch for a deer. There had been no fresh meat in the little house since spring, but now the fawns were grown up and Pa would go hunting again. Pa had made a deer lick. Now these days we can just go to the hardware store and you can buy a salt block. That's a deer lick. Mr. Bartholomew has one out back for our deer. They love it. They come and lick it all the time. It's called a deer lick. Have you ever seen a deer lick? Pa had made a deer lick in an open place in the woods with trees nearby in which he could sit to watch. A deer lick was a place where the deer came to get salt. When they found a salty place in the ground, they would come there to lick it. It's called a deer lick. Pa had made one by sprinkling salt over the ground. After supper, Pa took his gun and he went into the woods, and Laura and Mary went to sleep without any stories and without any music. As soon as they woke in the morning, they ran to the window. But there was no deer hanging in the trees. Pa had never before gone out to get a deer and not come home with one. Pa was a good hunter. Laura and Mary did not know what to think. All day Pa was busy banking the little house and the barn with dead leaves and straw, held down by stones to keep out the cold. The weather was growing colder all day, and that night there was once more a fire on the hearth, and the windows were shut tight and chinked for the winter. That means they've been sealed up so they'd hold the heat in. After supper, Pa took Laura on his knee while Mary sat close by in her little chair. And Pa said, "Now I'll tell you why you had no fresh meat to eat today. When I went out to the deer lick, I climbed up in a big oak tree. I found a place on a branch where I was comfortable and could watch the deer lick. I was near enough to shoot any animal that came to it, and my gun was loaded and ready on my knee. There I sat and waited for the moon to rise and the light the clearing. I was a little tired from chopping wood all day yesterday, and I must have fallen asleep, for I found myself opening my eyes. The big round moon was just rising. I could see it between the bare branches of the trees low in the sky, and right against it I saw a deer standing. His head was up, and he was listening. His great branching horns stood out above his head. He was dark against the moon. It was a perfect shot. But he was so beautiful. He looked so strong and free and wild that I just couldn't kill him. I sat there and I looked at him until he had bounded away into the dark woods. Then I remembered that Ma and my little girls were waiting for me to bring home some fresh venison, some good fresh venison. I made up my mind that the next time I would shoot. Well, after a while, a big bear came lumbering out into the open. He was so fat from feasting on berries and roots and grubs all summer that he was nearly as large as two bears. His head swayed from side to side as he went on all fours across the clear space in the moonlight until he came to a rotten log. He smelled it and he listened. Then he pawed it apart and sniffed among the broken pieces, eating up fat white grubs. Then he stood up on his hind legs. I'd be petrified. Stood up on his hind legs, perfectly still, looking all around him. He seemed to be suspicious that something was wrong. He was trying to see or smell what it was. He was a perfect mark to shoot at. But I was so much interested in watching him, and the woods were so peaceful in the moonlight, that I forgot all about my gun. I did not even think about shooting him till he was waddling away into the woods. Well, this will never do, I thought. I'll never get any meat this way. I settled myself into the tree and I waited again. This time I was determined I was going to shoot the next game I saw. The moon had risen higher and the moonlight was brighter in the little open place. All around it the shadows were dark among the trees. After a long while, a doe and her yearling fawn came stepping daintily out of the shadows. They were not afraid at all. They walked over to the place where I had sprinkled the salt, and they both licked up a little of it. Then they raised up their heads, and they looked at each other. The fawn stepped over and stood beside the doe. They stood there together, looking at the woods in the moonlight, and their large eyes were shining and soft. It's really fun to sit out in the woods at night, especially if you feel safe. I just sat there looking at them until they walked away among the shadows. Then I climbed down out of the tree and I came home. Laura whispered in his ear, "I'm glad you didn't shoot them." Mary said, "We can eat bread and butter." Pa lifted Mary up out of her chair and hugged them both together. "You're my good girls," he said. "Now it's bedtime. Run along while I get my fiddle." When Laura and Mary had said their prayers and were tucked snugly under the trundle bed's covers, Pa was sitting in the firelight with the fiddle. Ma had blown out the lamp because she did not need its light. On the other side of the hearth, she was swaying gently in her rocking chair, and she had her knitting needles flashing in and out above the sock she was knitting. The long winter evenings of firelight and music had come again. Pa's fiddle wailed while Pa was singing, "Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I'm a-going to California, the gold dust for to see." Then Pa began to play again the song about old Grimes. Do you remember that one? But he did not sing the words he had sung when Ma was making cheese. These words were different. Pa's strong, sweet voice was softly singing, "Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and the days of old lang syne? And the days of old lang syne, my friend, and the days of old lang syne. Should old acquaintance be forgot, and the days of old lang syne." When the fiddle had stopped singing, Laura called out softly, "What are days of auld lang syne, Pa?" "Well, those are the days of a long time ago, Laura," Pa said. You go on to sleep now. But Laura lay awake a little while, listening to Pa's fiddle, softly playing, and to the lonely sound of the wind in the big woods. She looked at Pa sitting on the bench by the hearth, and the firelight gleaming on his brown hair and beard, and glistening on the honey brown fiddle. She looked at Ma gently rocking and knitting, and she thought to herself, this is now. She was glad that the cozy house and Pa and Ma and the firelight and the music were now. They could not be forgotten, she thought, because now is now. It can never be a long time ago. The end. But it was a long time ago. I like the way it has next to it, come home to little house. So all you have to do, you can read the Martha years, the Charlotte years, the Caroline years, the Laura years. That's what we're reading is the Laura years. The next house in the series is Little House on the Prairie, which is wonderful, followed by Farmer Boy on the banks of Plum Creek. I really like that one. By the shores of Silver Lake, The Long Winter, Little Town on the Prairie, those happy golden years, and then the first 4 years. So, oh, I love this book. Thank you for sharing it with me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. You have in your packet for this week a paper covering chapters 11, 12, and 13. So you need to work on those today. Give me your very best answers. Don't forget to work on your quarantine packet. Make sure that you're going through and giving good, thoughtful answers. Remember, that will be a reading grade for you. So have a great Monday. Enjoy every part of it. Don't worry, this cold, wet weather is going to go away. They say next weekend it's going to get up almost to 80. 80! It's going to feel like summertime. Love you guys. May the Lord keep watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. Bye-bye.